Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered how we make sense of the noisy world around us? Today we're diving into a super interesting study that has created a brand new way for scientists to understand how we hear and process all the different sounds we encounter every single day. Think about it, our ears are constantly taking in a flood of information, from a car honking to a cat meowing to a bird singing and everything in between. How do our brains sort all of this out? Well, this research team wanted to help build better tools both for us humans and for computers to understand these sounds. So the big problem these researchers found was that while we have lots of sound libraries out there, they often don't have enough variety. Imagine a dataset where only one sound represents dog barking. That is not how it works in real life, right? Dogs bark in so many different ways. This lack of variety can make it hard for both our brains and for artificial intelligence to learn and recognize sounds accurately. They wanted to create a go-to resource that provided lots of different examples for each type of sound. And that is exactly what they built. They called it the EnviSounds dataset. It's like a giant library of environmental sounds, but with a really smart design, they gathered over 1,000 sounds, covering 53 different categories of everyday sounds. These categories include sounds made by people, sounds from nature, and sounds made by machines or human-made objects. The really cool part is that for each category, they didn't just pick one sound, they picked 10 different examples, all from natural recordings. That means you get 10 different dog barks or 10 different car horns, showing the natural variety. They were super careful about the quality of the sounds they chose. They made sure the sounds were clear, recognizable, and didn't have too much background noise. They also paid attention to how the sounds were labeled, creating descriptive labels like dog barking or cat meowing, to make sure everyone understood what they were hearing. After creating this amazing sound collection, they didn't stop there. They wanted to know how people experience these sounds. So, they did 3 main experiments involving over 1,000 listeners. In the first experiment, they asked people to listen to pairs of sounds and rate how similar or different they were. This helped them understand within-category variability. For example, they wanted to know if different dog barks sounded similar to each other to people. And in the second experiment, they asked listeners to rate how well a specific sound represented its category. Imagine hearing a sound and then saying, yep, that is a perfect example of a bird singing, or that is kind of a weak example of a bird singing. This is called goodness of exemplar ratings. Finally, in the third experiment, they tested how quickly and accurately people could recognize and identify the sounds, and also how easily the sounds brought a mental image to mind, which they call imageability. So what did they find? This is where it gets really interesting. First, they discovered that our perception of sounds isn't uniform. For some categories like thunder sounding or crowd cheering, people found some sounds very similar to each other, but others quite different. But for categories like bird calling or man laughing, the sounds were more consistently perceived as different from each other. This tells us that even within the same type of sound, there is a lot of variation in how we perceive it. Then, looking at how well a sound represented its category, they found that some sounds were clearly better examples than others. For example, a sound of a train horn or hammering might have a wide range of ratings, meaning some listeners thought it was a great example and others not so much. And in their recognition task, they found that human sounds were generally recognized faster and more accurately than mechanical or natural sounds. They also found that sounds that were considered better examples, more representatives, were recognized faster and with greater accuracy and elicited stronger mental images. This makes a lot of sense. Right. If a sound is a really clear and typical example of its category, it is easier for our brains to process it quickly and get a clear picture in our minds. So, what does all of this mean? This dataset is a huge win for researchers. It allows them to study environmental sounds at a much deeper level. They can now investigate not just how we distinguish between different types of sounds like a dog and a cat, but also how we handle the variations within a single category, like all the different ways a dog can bark. This is super important because real-life soundscapes are messy and full of these within. Category variations. For example, imagine studying how our brains process sounds. Using this dataset, scientists can choose sounds that are acoustically similar but belong to different categories like distant traffic and sea waves and see how our brains figure out the difference. Or they can pick sounds from the same category that have very different acoustic features. like the bark of a tiny chihuahua versus a big Rottweiler, and see how our brains still recognize them as dog barking. This is crucial for building better artificial intelligence that can understand the world like we do. It also has huge potential for clinical applications. For people with hearing impairments, like those using cochlear implants, understanding and distinguishing environmental sounds can be a challenge. This dataset could help develop more precise tests and rehabilitation tools that use a wider range of sounds. Similarly, for individuals with auditory agnosia, a condition where people have trouble recognizing sounds, this dataset could be invaluable for diagnosis and therapy. And it's useful for developmental research too. Scientists can use it to study how children learn to identify and categorize sounds and how they link sounds to meaning. This can shed light on how our auditory perception develops. Now, no study is perfect, and the researchers were upfront about their limitations. They mentioned that they focused on common everyday sounds, so rare sounds or sounds specific to certain contexts, like the sounds of a particular sports game or a specific household appliance, might be missing. They also noted that the sounds are relatively short, which is great for some research, but might not capture the full temporal complexity of longer sounds like birdsong or flowing water. And, like many datasets, it might lean towards sounds common in certain cultures, which could affect cross-cultural research. But even with these limitations, the EnviSounds dataset is a massive leap forward. It gives us a rich, well-annotated resource to explore the complex world of environmental sound perception. It's really exciting to think about the new discoveries that will come from this. From my perspective, the biggest win here is the focus on within-category variability. This is what makes real world sound perception so challenging and so fascinating by providing multiple, diverse examples for each sound category. The researchers have created a powerful tool for understanding how we generalize, how we categorize, and how our brains deal with the natural messiness of the auditory world. This is going to be a game changer for both human and computational models of audition. Looking ahead, I'm really curious to see how this dataset will be used to train AI systems to understand soundscapes more like humans do, and how it might lead to better diagnostic tools for auditory issues. I also think it would be fantastic if they could expand it with longer recordings and perhaps some sounds from less common cultural contexts. That's it for this week's dive into RUBIN'S Mind Lab. What do you think about the EnviSounds dataset? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful, subscribe for more mind-blowing science, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. See you next time.